R22 tout le monde. Antenne cadiste.
Good evening to everyone. Thank you for making it tonight. We have a busy schedule. So just a few words before I introduce Antonia and ILiana. For Cadiste, as a private structure that works outside of like the politics of the state and the state agenda, and also being a young kind of evolving institution, we've always been very attentive to how we allocate our financial and human resources, and also interested in alternative models. So tonight we're going to be talking a lot about sustainability and actually different possibilities and new models, hopefully. And I was personally preparing the event quite inspired also and remembering a project that we did 10 years ago, actually, when we hosted a part of a project called Société Anonyme. I don't know if any of you recall this project that was done by the team of Castillo Corrales, who unfortunately cannot join us tonight, but maybe some of you know them, Thomas Boutou, François Biron, and Benjamin Torel. And so when we did this project, it was also in a similar fashion, working around modes of production and research, thinking about different institutional models, and really thinking about also the specific context that different models were addressing and the needs in these contexts. So in this spirit, although, as I said, the program is quite packed, with Antonia and ILiana, we have organized several moments for question and answer and discussion. And we wanted to include specific local participants. So that's why we invited a certain number of independent art spaces from Paris and the region around Paris. And I really hope that this is also an occasion for these different spaces to meet and for all of us to meet. And also I think we'll have some times for maybe each of you to kind of introduce also what you're doing, or at least hopefully that will be introduced during the discussion time. So maybe now I can introduce Antonia and ILiana. So Antonia Alampi and ILiana Fokianaki, thank you for organizing tonight. You'll be introducing your guests afterwards, so I'm going to focus just on you two. And you're the co-founders of Future Climates, and also the curators of Kunsthal Extra City in Antwerp. And Antonia is also the artistic co-director of Savvy Contemporary in Berlin. And ILiana is the founder and director of State of Concept in Athens. So already you have like multiple institutional belongings, which is interesting also, I think, about what we're addressing tonight. And so I'm going to give you the floor, and I wish you all a very good evening, and I hope a very nice discussion.
Thank you, actually, Emily and Cadiste and State of Concept for having us here. It's funny because I think that the multiple institutional engagement sounds so fancy, but actually are mostly related to trying to make enough money to pay rent at the end of the month, actually. So we thought to start our presentation by talking about first an artwork that we actually co-produced together with Cadiste, and that was somehow the first actual visible and public act of Future Climates itself. It's a work by Alexandra Pirici, who's a Romanian performance artist, and the work is called Parthenon Marbles, and we commissioned it for the program that started in Athens in 2017. Basically, to give you a bit of a background story, because I don't know how many people are really familiar with the story of the Parthenon Marbles, which anyway is a story that the work itself engages with. In 1801, the then ambassador, the British ambassador to the Ottoman Empire in Athens, basically produced what are now debated as almost fake documents to have allowance to take off almost half of the sculptures decorating the Parthenon, in addition to various actually also other buildings on the Acropolis in Athens. After, I think, almost 10 years of work, these sculptures, which are literally taken off from the building, are shipped to London to decorate his private mansion. But what happens is that he goes into the debt, has a failure, disastrous divorce agreement, and gets into debt. And so is forced to actually sell these marbles to the British state, who then decides to give them, let's say, to the British Museum. Once Greece actually becomes an independent state in 1832, they start a whole program also of, let's say, reconstruction, let's say, or of its archaeological remains. And they start already then asking back these marbles from the British Museum. So since then, a huge debate has continued to be lively, let's say, because these marbles never came back. Now, there's many reasons why there's a lot of different narratives related to why these marbles are not back. The first one was the fact that Greece did not have an infrastructure to actually preserve something that is considered a sort of world capital, let's say. Which of course speaks to the current position of objects, taken from all over the world and positioned in various museums, ethnographic museums, for instance, in addition to various other very important artworks that the British Museum has, from the Benin bronzes, Nigerian, to the Rosetta Stone from Egypt. Greece, at that point, or after many, many years actually, responds by actually constructing a museum, which is the Acropolis Museum, to host these marbles back. Of course, nonetheless, the marbles have not been moved anyway. And so another huge, let's say, self-description of the British Museum becomes the fact that they are a museum that has a sort of universal purpose, which is to keep artworks from all over the world, because it is in London that, let's say, the sort of great masterpieces, exactly, from all over the world can be kept, contained, and seen. What the work really engaged with was this claim of universalism, and it did so also by really looking into the concrete facts of the economy that is behind owning these masterpieces, which means really the sort of, let's say, I would say, economic income that the museum makes, the number of tourists that actually go to London even just to visit this museum, and also what does it mean to have a universal museum in London? This gives access essentially to whom? And so the artist basically performed a sort of immaterial repatriation. The work was a performative act of hours, in which 5 performers perform stories of basically the stories narrated in the sculptures of the Parthenon Marbles itself, while almost delivering a lecture, but also with a lot of flies of imagination and different associations that really create a link between issues of infrastructures, let's say, the sort of what comes along with the power related to strong or weak economic positions. So also let's say the weight of different institutions and what type of politics that brings along, and of course the hegemony that is dressed as civilizing missions that the sort of British Museum wanted to perform and keeps performing in that sense. And I feel that there's a lot of discussions and frustrations and thoughts and reflections that have brought us to build future climates that relate very much to issues of precarity and inequality, are somehow embedded, even though not directly nor didactically, in this work. So here you have some images. Sorry, I'm always too long, but we started later also. So Future Climates basically is a platform that was founded in the aftermath of various experiences that ILiana and I had in the past years. I worked for 3 years in Cairo, and I think one experience, I was a curator also there of a project space. It was called Beirut, that actually also collaborated with Cadiz a few years ago. And she was particularly interested in one project that I directed at the time that was called the Imaginary School Program. program, which was basically a 9-month research on institution building in Cairo. And what we were looking at was the economic conditions that defined, in the case of Cairo, it's only independent institutions anyway, that define their work, but also the influence that certain funding agendas actually have on the type of programs that are possible, as well as, of course, issues of legality, which then I won't go into. I'm happy to talk about it more informally later during drinks, that are very specific also to a country like Egypt, which has a military dictatorship. So, I mean, let's say the legal aspect of it is also, I think, very different than in European countries. Maybe
Yeah, that was, just to give you a very small, first of all, hello. Just to give you a very small kind of brief of what it is that we do at State of Concept. We have 4 exhibitions every year, and one exhibition is an invited international curator. And that was the premise through which I reached out to Antonia, because I was following Beirut and the Imaginary School program. And then, of course, by her coming to do research in Athens, we began a dialogue, and that's in fact how Future Climates came to be. And mostly by these discussions that Antonia referenced, which of course was what are the premises under which small-scale institutions work. Of course, the main one being that they are based mainly in DIY economies and underpaid or unpaid labor, of course, which I think is something that we all share. What Antonia very, very intensely says is that, large-scale institutions always somehow benefit from this labor that small-scale institutions have. And this has been kind of one part of our discussion that, we're really pushing for, because it's quite interesting for us how all kind of precarious labor that occurs in the first stages of one's career, whether we are a curator or an artist and we're running a space, is somehow appropriated in the greater machine of the museums and the bigger institutions. But to go to the Athens context, so of course, discussing with Antonia, we found a lot of similarities from Egypt and Cairo and Athens in Greece.
And even Italy, I would say. I mean, I'm South Italian, so there's...
And I would say also in Paris, and I'm sure we can discuss it, or in Brussels, or in other cities, the particular situation in Athens was that there is no state funding whatsoever, not at all. There is no support. There is no arts council, for example, like it was in the UK when I was living there and working there. So we were very much dependent on private funding, and still are, which is a very small pie that has to be shared by institutions, and many institutions that are kind of popping up now after after Documenta also arrived in Athens. So that was one question that we wanted to address primarily with Future Climates with Antonia, on how is these institutions that are private funders influencing the art scene. What is the modus operandi of all these institutions? So Future Climates occurred in late March in 2017. It was dressed as a school, but in fact it was a research program, commissioning of new artworks, and 12 participants that came internationally and did research on the ground by visiting all the institutions there, talking with curators, interviewing, going to places, or having people coming in. Of course, just to give you a brief, this is, for example, can we say an artwork?
First of all, it's State of Concept.
This is State of
Concept.
Concept.
Which is basically a former garage, right?
No, it's a former prêt-à-porter, as it says there, which basically belongs still, it's a very small building, a 3-story building that belongs to a family that they produce fabrics and they import fabrics. So they had this small prêt-à-porter doing wedding gowns and stuff like that, but they closed because of the crisis. So this is Marcus Meesens. We contacted Marcus and we asked him, how would you think of a space that would, engulf all these activities?
They were mostly discursive and didactic and pedagogic.
And we were expecting him to create seats and things like that. And then he said to us, well, I mean, all small-scale institutions, in fact, survive because they have a bar. So this is the bar that Marcus made. The interesting thing is, if we go back, the the sign that you see, which is in German. It says, you should say it, I can never pronounce it.
Well, it's actually in Greek, but it's a
yeah,
German metaphor. So he was playing also with, let's say, the
I'm
arrival
not
of
going to even dare
Documenta.
pronounce it.
Heter pis voltic, which means
Partly cloudy.
Partly cloudy, serene with
So he
sereno
was
variabile in Italian. we say.
He was playing very much with this idea of only someone that is Greek could read it, but he has to speak German. And of course, this plays a lot with what are the qualities that all us precarious workers that live in peripheries have to have in order to be able to exist in the art world as well. Because if you just go with Greek and you don't speak any other language, or you live in Berlin and you don't speak German, then you have a problem. So that was one of the works that we commissioned. And then where's the other one?
So he really, built a bar.
He really built a bar. You can also see a work of Martha Rosler on a screen. And then this was the other work, which was a very big wall painting of Navin Kantossos. She's a British artist that lives in Athens, that is basically using kind of the aesthetic references of graphs and of finances, of economics for her work. So that was the other one. And just to go to the kind of first big event that we had about a week after we started, we did appropriate, of course, as a small-scale institution that didn't have funds, the fact that Documenta was in town, because we wouldn't have been able, for example, to bring Maria Lind or Mohamed Salemi or Emily Pethick or Victoria, which you see there, which, by the way...
No, Victoria we paid everything for.
Oh, that's true. And just by the way, small asterisk, the work of Alexandra Pirici is based on a text that she has written with Victoria, and the research that she did with Victoria. So just to cut a long story short, I mean, this was the first kind of week of Future Climate, with a lot of people coming in and bringing knowledge, and then the rest 2.5 months involved us bringing people. Olaf Veltius was another interesting contribution, where he was basically talking about the whitewashing of money in contemporary art, which is something that we don't easily talk about in terms of where the money comes from, whether it is for a museum or an artwork, etc.
But also what kind of... he actually started a new PhD program research in Amsterdam that he's basically working on right now. So the outcomes will be in a few years. But it's called Whitewashing Reputations with Contemporary Art. So it's actually looking at why are funders funding, what type of taxation facilities, for instance, they go through it, etc. So he was trying to put a few case studies to also try to discuss the ethics behind it. So also, what parameters do we actually use to say what funding
we react
is
as well, because
fine and which is not?
Yeah,
and so on the one hand, there is the why are funders investing? So what kind of investment ideals are there, but also how do we define what's a good money and bad money in that sense as well, which was also again a huge discussion that was happening in Greece in relationship also to massive, biennials, etc., that often have to make quite a few compromises in order to make their figures match.
And then we have CEP as well, which is an interesting initiative that actually started through discussions that we had with local curators. This is Elpida Karabash. She's one of the 3 curators that are basically trying to create a union for cultural workers in general, not just visual arts, because another big problem in Greece, because another big problem that we face is that in fact being a curator does not exist in Greek standards. Therefore, you do not have a valid tax number, or let's say a tax description. So you cannot ascribe yourself as a curator at the tax office. You can be a writer, you can be a museum worker, but the notion of curatorship does not exist. So they're trying to make changes in the legislation system as well as the pension system, which, because of the crisis, has annihilated a small kind of union that existed for visual arts. We invited eFlux guys. Also, we're already in Athens coming for Documenta, and we were very interested also really in eFlux as a model, really from a, let's say, economic perspective. How does that work? They're completely independent from subsidies or grants, etc. So
I don't know if they really shared everything, but I mean, that's really why we wanted to look into it. How does it work as an economic model that basically managed to be entirely self-sustainable? And how could we have such a good idea too?
Yeah, and so that was like our opening night, yeah. And then you have, I mean, these are just images from several
basically for 3 months
projects,
we had an ongoing program of, so we had these 12 people that also throughout the time became 8, at a certain point even 6, and they were in between international and local, and they had a basically 3 months program where we sat together with contributors coming from the not-for-profit sector but also the for-profit sector. Really, again, the discussion was more on infrastructure. It wasn't really about what type of programs everybody does, but it's more about really how would their projects, spaces, institutions, or for-profit companies actually function legally, economically? What type of contracts, et
or
cetera?
nothing? For example, like the example here of Green Park, which is a squat that has been operating in Athens for 4 years now, and actually recently, a year and a half ago, they launched a performance biennial that they do, and everything is done by their own funds or by just having a bar, of course. Outside of the main space where they just offer drinks, and they have concerts sometimes and things like that. Or, for example, 3137, which is a studio of 3 Greek artists. In fact, they have the studio upstairs and in the basement, and they do small exhibitions or publications, etc. At the ground floor. Or what was that? By the way,
this was a workshop with other. I mean, we invited also artists. I mean, so not everything was just discussion. But I think, I mean, yeah,
Nicolien van Haarskamp presenting her project.
Yeah, and then here you have a bit of a mix. I mean, I must say, because we want to share with you also what didn't work. We don't want to just celebrate what happened. And I must say that when we began the project, we thought, okay, let's do this intense research program with people who are all particularly interested in this, because we really hoped that via this experience, they could come up with brilliant ideas on how to work differently, which is, of course, was a very optimist kind of wishful thinking type of situation, because actually they were extremely overwhelmed also by the amount of information that they were receiving, but also I must say a little bit also by the same type of models at the same time that they were encountering. So there wasn't actually all that diversity, and I think it ended up being that everybody was kind of really dependent on exactly the same type of structures. I think there's also most contributors were coming from kind of similar social classes, you know, that would also allow you to being able to spend a lot of your time.
I would say for the local content more.
Yeah. No. I'm talking about the Greek context, I would say that we obviously deeply engaged with. And so, I mean, maybe to go to tonight, I mean, what we, and that's also why we founded Future Climates as something that we wanted to continue beyond, in any case, this Greek chapter, is that we wanted to keep thinking about how can we actually think, engineer, different models. Different models are not, again, constantly dependent practically from the same sources, and would not imply very, very similar working conditions, which again is usually volunteer labor, a lot of self-exploitation, a lot of changing jobs after a few years or closing small-scale organizations to just start working in larger ones, etc. Because we believe in the need for small organization, not as just something that happens at the beginning of your career until you can then, be somehow employed somewhere else that makes your life sustainable, but we believe in the need and important work that small-scale organizations do that large ones cannot, for many different reasons.
And also, it's a policy thing as well, especially if you look at it at the European continent, that lately with the neoliberal policies, you see all the shifts and all the big funds going to the very big institutions. And for example, to look at the, Antwerp, where we both work, okay, in comparison, for example, to Italy or Greece, it is a large-scale institution, but in fact, in Belgian standards, it's a mid-scale institution, and you see how the influx of money is kind of less, because more they're focusing on big museums. And this exists, I think, also in Berlin, also in Amsterdam, in many countries. And
the sort of crisis, yes, of the mid-scale, essentially.
And the small scale we're not even discussing about, because everybody's thinking that, of course, it would be working with DIY economy, because that's the model. And I think there is one kind of big problem that we're trying to somehow address. We're not pretending that we're giving solutions here in any way, but it's nice to be here with people that are doing similar jobs than ours, just to discuss these issues, because I think this is kind of the core thing that is annoying, that is a de facto thing, that anything that is small scale and fresh and young should not have the relevant pay of the labor.
But also, I think that, the evening of tonight, and that's, I think, where also our interests, based on the experience of in Athens, are going. And again, we can then informally talk more about Athens. We have a quite intense schedule, so we can't, go into it too much. Is really actually new ideas that came out that really relate to creating investment funds, or really intervening or accessing the financial markets. And basically what we present tonight are some case studies of either organizations or artists or theorists that are working with this field. In particular, I think the first presentation or the second by Giulia Palomba. I'll now introduce you to the various speakers. So we have Giulia Palomba, who was one of the researchers with us in Athens. She's Italian. And she, I would say, is the most interesting outcome, actually, of that experience, because she basically founded a cultural cooperative network together with a Spanish activist, Enrique Duran, who is actually hiding in Greece at the moment because of his
Basque,
previous past in Spain, which... Anyways, another complicated matter, but basically we have video contributions tonight by Giulia Palomba that will explain what project actually came out of this experience, and it's totally a prototype and is looking also for more partners. She will go into it, and it is basically a new, potentially global cultural network of different institutions that together create an investment fund. She'll go into the ins and outs of it. Then we have W.A.G.E, which probably you know, Working Artists and the Greater Economy, which was founded in 2008 and is a New York-based activist organization whose mission is to establish sustainable economic relationships between artists and institutions that contract their labor, and to introduce mechanisms for self-regulation into the art field that collectively bring about a more equitable distribution of its economy. And there it's going to be quite interesting also, because they've been reflecting a lot about how to move on with the very famous Siegellaub, artists agreement, and really reflecting on what has not worked, how could it work differently, and how could it be distributed differently, and how could we make sure also that those basic premises are actually
and just to add
ensured.
That also Jubilee, which is a collective from Belgium, are also looking, some of the members from Jubilee are also looking into these aspects, and Ronnie and Kathleen are also part of them, and they will, of course, be presenting their own project. But just to mention that, from one state of the globe to the other side of the pond, as they say, people are really trying to kind of look up to all these things that were happening in the 70s in terms of these questions, and kind of readdressing them now, because I think it has to do very much with finance. And just to give a little note, W.A.G.E happened in 2008, which was just a few months after the collapse of Lehman Brothers and the whole kind of disaster in the States. Yeah. So
unfortunately, Galit Eilat, who was mentioned as part of the program
So we're trying to get her text to read, so we might or we might not.
Yeah. And then we invited Kathleen Vermeer and Ronnie Herriman, who maybe represent a bit also our future, in the sense that they're based in Brussels and in Belgium, and it's also through our work in Extra City that we met them. And I'm going to read you also their biography, which is in their videos and installations investigate the complex relationship between economy, spatiality, and social reality in today's highly globalized world, focusing on the mechanism of financial structures and the ways in which they produce and generate cultural processes images, the duo raises questions about the ever-growing entanglement between urban development, social status, and fetishism. The artists employ financial tools, historical references, technology, and cinematic language to reflect on social codes as well as on the production of value in today's artistic and non-artistic realms. And then we will close with a talk by Victoria Ivanova, who's a person we're basically working on since a year and a half at least, and every time we do something, we basically invite Victoria in it. And she's a curator and writer and consultant, currently based in London. Her core focus is on systemic and infrastructural conditions that shape socioeconomic, political, and institutional realities. To this extent, she develops innovative approaches to policy, finance, and rights in the spheres of contemporary art and beyond. She's the co-founder of Izoliatia, Real Flow and Bureau for Cultural Strategies, and currently completing her PhD at Goldsmith. And she's also what I call a very interesting person to talk to, I mean, in case also you're interested in these matters, for consultancy, really, because she's one of those that for me are like the technicians almost that understand in very also technical terms, I think the almost the subject of the evening. And then we're going to eat. Yes, and then we're going to eat together. I mean, the idea was also based on the fact that often the most interesting conversations actually happen off stage. And so we really wanted to make space for hanging out together and continuing debates also with wine and food and not just by sitting on maybe not even too comfortable chairs.
Shall we move on to
so
to
we
Giulia?
move on. So we have two video contributions. I mean, the sound is really important, I guess, because the second is also very sound-based. And I know it might be a bit heavy, but it's worth to listen through it.
Hello everybody, I'm Giulia Palomba and I'm the co-founder of the Cultural Cooperative Network, or CCN, which has been conceived in June 2017 in Athens within the framework of the School of Redistribution. And CCN is like a meeting point between the already existing cooperative ecosystem FERICOP and the research I was working on, which was focus on the relation between alternative currencies and cultural sector. So CCN is an international circuit designed to facilitate both economical and social relation between cultural actors and to provide them with basically different economical tools and a common aid mutual fund in order to encourage self-management, self-employment, and economic autonomy, and to propose a new way for support cultural production, not based on public or private funds. So CCN is basically dedicated to artists, curator, non-profit art spaces, collective, both legally or not legally recognized, commercial gallery, so for profit, but with no hierarchical structure, but like artist run space or and create, like the aim is to create a network, a cooperative network. So there are memberships, and this network work globally. So both on a local level through the creation of these local cultural nodes, which are gonna be a cornerstone between the local sector and the global one. So most of this connection will take part on Telegram groups. CCN structure has been conceived as very horizontal, not hierarchical, and so based on consensus and vote. So this will take place on Telegram groups, Telegram assemblies, and also on local physical assemblies. So the idea of this network is to provide services such as invoice, for example, as Smart, which you probably already know, this Smart Belgium, Smart Italy, or so all the members can use the VAT number of the cooperative without actually having its own, and so they can avoid this legal process of open their own VAT number. But the most important, let's say, goal for the cooperative is the mutual aid fund. So the idea is that through all the members, we're gonna spread this crowdfunding campaign to collect a common cooperative fund. This fund will be given as a loan without interest for the cultural production or project production. So still always based on this consensus common vote. So members are gonna make a proposal for a project, and all the cooperative has to agree with that and to give a certain amount of money to realize a project. Of course, the idea is that the cooperative, the members, share the debts, share the risk, but also the surplus when there's gonna be, and also is a process of collectivized the risk. That means that, of course, it's the interest of everybody that this loan, this money, come back to the fund. And so we thought that on a local level, spaces, artists can help the space or the artist who took this fund, this loan, to organize maybe an event in order to recover the money, to give it back to the fund. And also, since we realized that sometimes it's very difficult to recover money, for example, for non-profit spaces, we can activate a sort of time bank, space-time bank system, which means that if I'm a space in Berlin and I have to give 2,000 euro back to the fund, but I don't have it cash, I can maybe give my space. I can make my space available for one of the members of the cooperative to use it to realize a project, like, for free. So it's like a kind of an exchange of services within this network, cooperative network. So the idea is, to basically to work on collectivized practices, distribution of risk, healthy competition, decentralized consensus, sharing power, and also redistribute the money for cultural production. Another important aspect of the CCN is the relation with the fair coin. As I said at the beginning, CCN used the already existing platform of FairCop, which is a fair cooperative, which work with the fair coin, and which is an alternative currency, and that create an alternative bank called Bank of the Commons. So all the monies of this common funds are gonna be transformed in fair coin. The importance of fair coin is that the main difference between Faircoin and the other cryptocurrencies is that it's not based on mining and minting. So what is called in the specific language, POW or POS, so proof of work and proof of states, which are basic elements to establish this kind of competition that make the value of the cryptocurrency growing. The algorithm, which on Ferricoin is based, is called certified validation nodes, and is a specific unique algorithm based on consensus. So it's basically the owner, the cooperative owner of the coin establish the value of the coin, which is also which is not gonna be create again. I mean, there is a certain amount of Ferricoin which has been created, and they stopped creating new coins. So working on this economical, let's say, law. One is the circulation. So more the Ferricoin circulate, more its value grows. So let's say half of the Ferricoin, the existing Ferricoin, is like circulating, and we are trying to activate it more point of exchange of the coins. And let's say the other half is like storage in this bank. And so since it's a limited amount of existing coin, this makes its value growing. And this means that actually this fund, this Cultural Cooperative Network fund, is gonna grow, is gonna implement its value by itself. Just the idea of staying there, like its value is gonna grow. And so the fund is kind of gonna be itself sustainable, and is gonna produce more value by itself, just by using it by the storage of it. It's kind of complex to explain every aspect of the network, how it works, but we already we started to make a website, which is now in Italian, English, and Spanish, and is ccn.coop. And you can write me at the email address info@ccn.coop for any information. We started to create some cultural local nodes. We have more or less 10-15 members right now, mostly in Italy and in Spain. And yeah, we're kind of now like trying to first start this process of developing awareness, information, like giving information, and also since it's some kind of learning by doing process, we as well are like trying of shaping this network, following the needs and the different cases. So I hope I didn't forget anything important. I really want to thank Antonia and ILiana for having me talking about the project, and also for the chance of actually developing it, because that is actually what happened. And I will be happy to also know what the other talks are about, and how it is the cultural scene in Paris, if there are any let's say alternative ways of funding the cultural sector maybe using some cooperation systems or alternative currency maybe. So yes, thank you again everybody also for listening to me, and please don't hesitate to write to me if you have any question about CCN. Thank you for your attention.
Now we will have another video contribution, and then after we'll just discuss.
For close to 10 years, WAGE has been agitating around a single demand, that nonprofit art institutions pay fees to artists for the work they contract us to do. Focusing singularly on the payment of artist fees could be perceived as an epic act of durational performance. It might likewise be written off as an inconsequential adjustment to a field in need of total structural reform. It turns out to be neither, because WAGE is not an artwork, and any truly inconsequential adjustment wouldn't have taken a decade to make. The field's entrenched resistance to paying artist fees indicates a larger structural problem, and that's why WAGE is a larger project than it might seem. The very simple demand to be paid is as much an effort to recalibrate the art institution as it is an effort to recalibrate the labor of artists. It has also been an effort to recalibrate the institution of being an artist, because the call for compensation implicitly calls into question what artists do, why we do it, and who we do it for. And now, as financialization transforms the industry, what our work supports and is used for must also be called into question. A shift in WAGE's rhetoric over the years and how we describe the class position of artists reflects this transformation. Back in 2008, we framed the relationship between artists and institutions as being one of stark disparity, with artists representing an unpaid sub-creative underclass, marginalized and exploited by a thriving institutional field. Today, we make the case not on the basis of our distance from the field's elite, but on our proximity to it. How we put it to artists is this. If you're willingly going unpaid by an industry in which you and your work support a billionaire class, then not only are you being exploited, your exploitation is supporting the consolidation of wealth by it. This is how we argue that the demand to be paid is a political one, and we see WAGENCY as being a container for resistance and a politics of labor. WAGENCY is a forthcoming initiative by WAGE to organize artists and institutions, along with buyers and sellers of art, together around a shared politics of labor. But what is a politics of labor? At its most fundamental, it's an acknowledgement that labor is political. A politics of labor recognizes that economic exploitation is structural and reproduces existing forms of oppression. It is an assertion that the exploitation of human labor is a shared condition determined by political interests, and as such it can and must be challenged. The unpaid labor of artists represents a form of exploitation that is endemic to the contemporary art field. It is political because the profit made from the unpaid labor of artists directly supports the consolidation of global wealth and political power by a transnational elite. Whether or not the moral and political claims made by contemporary art are justified, they without question serve as cover for what is more or less a transactional industry. In the United States, the preconditions for arts neoliberalization are already built in. Privatization, defunding, and deregulation are buttressed by the uniquely American belief in exceptionality and meritocracy. In the U.S., these are political facts, and they're perfectly suited to justifying the non-payment of artists. The justification goes something like this. Artists should only get paid if it's merited, and only those with exceptional talent merit success. The market will decide who is successful, and because Americans are exceptional in their ability to work hard and transcend adversity, government regulation and oversight are unnecessary. This is one of the reasons the industry is unregulated, and the only way to regulate the unregulated, to get institutions to pay artists, is by coercing them to. WAGE uses administrative direct action to remind them that unless they back up the moral and political claims they make through their programs with materially equitable institutional policy, then they are failing as institutions. In addition to coercion, WAGE does the policy-based work the state has declined to do in its failure to recognize the value of artists' work as a public good and to support it as such. WAGE stepped in and produced guidelines and standards that delineate how much institutions should pay us and what they should pay us for. Our primary activity is a program that publicly certifies those nonprofits that voluntarily pay fees according to our guidelines and standards. WAGE certification defines the relationship between artists and institutions on hyper-specific economic terms, redefining the artist as a paid economic subject. This required us to debunk the myth of the artist's work as non-labor and dispense with the untruth that artists willfully place that non-labor outside of capital. In the context of WAGE certification, an artist is anyone who provides content for the programs of nonprofit arts organizations. So where artist had previously been a very specific someone defined by its exceptionality and willingness to work for free, that someone becomes anyone. Artist becomes content provider. Artist becomes contracted worker. Artist becomes just like everyone else, so that artist stops seeing itself as exceptional and expects to be paid, just like everyone else. We define an artist fee as the expected remuneration for an artist's temporary transactional relationship with an institution to provide content. An artist fee is not compensation for the labor or materials of making art, and it is not intended as compensation for the content itself. Rather, it is for its provision. This includes and is the work of working with an institution. Since WAGE certification's launch in 2014, nearly 50 nonprofits have been certified across the U.S. It might be fair to say we have succeeded in shifting the field, which is to say that after almost a decade of agitation, we have finally arrived at a general consensus that artists should be paid and that compensation for content provided is a reasonable expectation. But ironically, at the moment we arrive at our goal, the goalpost has been moved. Artist compensation now seems like the least urgent ground for political engagement. And just as WAGE moves into organizing the labor of artists, the nature of our labor appears profoundly privileged relative to the dehumanizing conditions most of the world's population endures. It is undeniable that artists work in dangerously close proximity to the top 1% that owns over half of the world's total household wealth. They consume the things we make as luxury goods and use them as financial instruments. So any labor campaign mounted on behalf of artists in the face of such inequity has to take a position relative to the chasm between working people, including and especially those in our own supply chain, and the global billionaires who are our customers, our funders, and our patrons. The question is, which side of the divide do we come down on? How can we identify as workers and still in good conscience service a billionaire class? This is a complicated question because the work of artists is complicated. It involves many of the same things that characterize other forms of contemporary work, but it remains unpaid and the forces determining its value are entirely different. These forces leave artists in a position of total confusion with regard to their own value. So even if artists agree with WAGE that the demand to be paid is a political one, preceding the choice to make the demand and engage it as a politics is the lived experience of being an artist. And coursing through that experience are two fundamental yet unspoken questions that arise in the struggle to produce meaning as such. Is my work good? Am I a good artist? These questions sometimes get answered in moments of validation or periods of clarity, but they persist because they're actually about something else. They're about value. Asking, is my work good, is the same as asking, does my work have value? Do I have value as an artist? Or just, do I have value? There's a dangerous vulnerability in posing these questions to a field that generates value through the false assertion that good is in short supply. Given that art's value is distorted, contingent, relational, and symbolic, there are no satisfactory answers to the question of whether or not my art is good or whether or not any of us as artists have value. In the eyes of the industry, most of us are of value to the extent that our failure enables a few to succeed. So for those artists who look to the industry, to the market, to awards, to curators, to historians, to critics, to gatekeepers of any kind for the answer, you're likely to be violently negated by it. But what if your work evolves not relative to the industry, but relative to the work of your peers? Embedded deep in the labor process of artists is the presence of a third entity, the work of other artists, a prism through which we observe each other's practices and make adjustments to our own. We hope art will be a more stable currency against which to more accurately measure our own work, because if measuring ourselves against the industry's standards yields nothing but unreliable distortion, then the artwork itself must be a more reliable point of comparison. But unfortunately, art is indivisible from the industry that surrounds and enables it, whether we as individuals choose to participate in that industry or not. As a commodity and as a public good, art's value is only and always contingent and is therefore always unstable. So when your peers' success causes the currency of their work to inflate or become overvalued, you're likely to experience a corresponding sense of devaluation, whether real or imagined. You are in fact participating in your own devaluation. So why does any of this matter? It matters because if we determine our artistic self-worth against a currency that is inherently unstable and subject to what the industry demands to extract from us, we will always and forever be bound to one another comparatively through objects whose value is determined by their potential to generate profit. For this reason, we need to build our own standards based on a common understanding of our work as having inherent value because it is our collective work. And its common value is something that we must also collectively enforce. If we're all linked in this arbitrary system of valuation, then we're all doing the work of increasing or decreasing each other's value. Once we acknowledge that my success is dependent on your failure, and that my failure enables your success, and that most of it is class-based, racialized, and about the reproduction of these conditions, it's only then that we will be able to effectively organize ourselves as a labor force. But with so much class stratification and competition between artists, collective mobilization seems unlikely. And this returns me to the question asked earlier: which side of the class divide do we, as artists, choose to come down on, since increasingly we're being called upon to take a position? This is happening very frequently now, relative to gentrification in LA's Boyle Heights or New York's Chinatown, for example, or the recent call by Hannah Black and others for artist Dana Schutz to take responsibility for treating black paint as raw material in her contribution to the Whitney Biennial. The claim by artists to neutrality may have finally and necessarily exhausted itself, a sign that exceptionality on any level, not just the economic one, is now a liability. So if we have to choose, do we identify with all those workers whose labor makes the production and visibility of our work possible? The fabricators, the administrators, the art handlers, the cleaning staff, the security guards? Or do we obediently, through our own claim to neutrality, align ourselves with those real estate developers, high net worth collectors, flippers, and money launderers whose monopoly on capital might, if we're lucky, enable us to continue being artists? This is the impossible choice between labor and capital. WAGENCY deals equally with labor and capital so that artists don't have to choose. In fact, that choice won't be available to artists as long as they choose to participate. The only way to neutralize this impossible choice is to provide tools to deal with both. So the question for WAGE is not which side do we come down on, but is why should we have to choose? Why should we have to pick labor over capital, or conversely disidentify with what could be a working class art world in order to earn income? We shouldn't, but if that's what the industry commands, then we have to find a way to resist it and build power in the process. So first, WAGENCY and labor. What started in 2015 as a simple idea to certify artists as well as institutions has since evolved into something much larger and more inclusive. WAGENCY will be a broad coalition of all those who voluntarily and publicly commit to adhering to wage standards, including institutions, artists, and later buyers and sellers of art, thereby drawing attention to the real problem: state deregulation, privatization, and the disinvestment in art as a shared public good and as a commons. Its purpose is threefold. 1. To build political and economic solidarity between artists. 2. To provide broad agency to artists of varying means. And 3. To enlist artists in sharing responsibility with institutions for the process of shifting the entire field towards something more sustainable. WAGENCY will provide artists with the digital tools and the necessary collective agency to negotiate compensation or withhold content and services from institutions that refuse to pay them fees according to wage standards. Its most powerful lever will be operated by wage-certified artists, who must be prepared to withhold their labor and pay equitably the subcontractors who contribute directly to producing the content of their artwork, namely their assistants. It's here that artists formally operate as institutions, where the studio becomes a factory, and where the equivalent of just-in-time scheduling and zero-hour contracts are increasingly found. But what about those who can't afford to turn down opportunities? These constitute the bulk of our constituency, and their participation is fundamental to building power, but equally it's WAGE's responsibility to help empower them. Because the perceived lack of success of the many is necessary to building value for the few, we believe this imbalance needs to be understood and accounted for, especially by those who benefit from it. As such, wage-certified artists will bear greater responsibility in using their leverage, and those with less can still join and operate as wagents. Instead of using a coordinated strike mechanism, WAGENCY takes the form of a matrix of individual boycotts that can and will happen at any given time. Its power lies in a large number of artists committing to withhold labor and demand fees, and on the pressure these acts apply to institutions over time. At WAGENCY's core is what we've been calling the seeds of unionization. Like a union, WAGENCY will be a worker-driven infrastructure that has the capacity to shift conditions in the field through collective mobilization. But it's also tasked with coordinating the atomized practices of content providers in a globalized economy made up of nonprofit and for-profit sectors that are totally interdependent. For it to have real impact, WAGENCY must offer mechanisms for self-regulation in both sectors that have the capacity for international application. Second, WAGENCY and capital. For WAGE, resistance has never meant denying the existence or necessity of commerce and art's subsumption under capital. It has always been a matter of developing tactics and tools that block, divert, and redistribute its flow. To this end, and as part of WAGENCY, we're working on an updated, digitized, and modular version of Seth Siegelaub and Robert Prjansky's 1971 The Artist's Reserved Rights Transfer and Sales Agreement. Also known as the Artist's Contract, it was intended to give artists control over the conditions of the sale of their work as well as the conditions of its exhibition, resale, and other concerns beyond artists' oversight once it has been transferred. It's best known for introducing the resale royalty, an artist's right to 15% of any increase in the value after the first sale. WAGE's update will be built on blockchain using a so-called smart contract. Blockchain is a decentralized ledger that can record each transaction or transfer of an artwork by tracking its movement through the marketplace in a way that's transparent, accessible, and unalterable. It also has the potential to manifest the highly individuated politics of artists' practices by enforcing control over the conditions of exhibition and circulation. The artist's contract is intended to do three things. 1. Reclaim a portion of the surplus of wealth generated by speculation on the unpaid labor of artists. 2. Redistribute this surplus to bring about a more equitable distribution of art's economy. And 3. Control the conditions under which artists' work is used. Where wage certification defines an artist fee as the expected remuneration for the work an artist does once they enter into a temporary transactional relationship with an institution to provide content, the resale royalty is the expected return on the investments made by an artist over time in the production of their work and the cultivation of their career. Where wage certification establishes a minimum fee, the contract will invoke a minimum politics. A core principle of this project is the assertion that moral and property rights are indivisible. Given the increasing use of art as a financial instrument, it is, or should be, an artist's right on moral grounds to resist or block its use as such. It is only through claiming a continued interest in our work as property that we can exercise the moral right to choose how our work is used when it's transformed into an asset class. Our long-range political objective is to significantly alter the industry's conditions of exchange, to bring about a more equitable and transparent distribution of its economy, and to give artists maximum agency in this process. Altering conditions at this scale will require a critical mass of use by as many artists, collectors, dealers, and institutions as possible. This will be contingent upon producing a contract whose terms and usability make it an industry standard. The artist's contract must make transactions easier and more beneficial than they would be without it. Insofar as the artist's contract is updated and adapted for maximum usability, it must equally provide opportunities for artists to exercise maximum political resistance. Our purpose is not to deny the commercial market by making sales impossible, which is one way the artist's contract can and was used when first introduced in the early 1970s. Rather, its purpose is to alter the terms of sale in order to redistribute the surplus of wealth generated by speculation on the unpaid labor of artists, and to control art's use as a financial instrument on moral grounds. In other words, denial of the market and the refusal to participate are not forms of resistance within WAGENCY. Resistance here means a critical mass of usage. The more we use it, the greater our resistance.
primarily, are there questions or comments at this stage? Because we had quite a few presentations already. So I think we should take them now if there are.
We have a few seats in the front.
Is it on? Yeah. Hi, my name is Guillaume Breton. I'm French. I used to be based in London, and I ran for about 6 years something at the junction of a project space and a commercial gallery. So I've got a first question. You mentioned first this 3 months in Athens. What happened with the archive of all your research? Because you're presenting today some of the result, but I think after 3 months you must have like tons of... Exactly. And is it available to a larger public? Is it online? What happened to it?
Yeah, so many of the talks, primarily, we forgot to say that part of the program was not public in the sense that it was just for the researchers, part of the program. So some of the lectures, we didn't exclude people from dropping in if they wanted to, but we didn't announce them as a constant kind of program. So the first week of programming is actually online at Mixcloud. So there is an account of Future Climates and State of Concept, and you can, see all.
Put it on Facebook also. There you have all of the talks.
Yeah.
Of the first week.
And some other talks that were also public, like Tanya Bruguera, etc. We have transcribed most of the talks, whether the ones that were public and whether the ones that were not public, as well as texts and notes from the participants, from the researchers. And we are currently preparing a publication that will actually probably include notes from today's meeting as well. So the first 2 chapters of Future Climates would be a book soon.
Which will be free to download online. However, we didn't get a grant or some money, decent money yet to actually have a website. So right now we don't have one, we just have a Facebook page. Also, a lot of also our private encounters actually have been recorded unless contributors didn't want to. So there is an archive that may or may not be accessible, but definitely we can be contacted also for more information and just sharing it, privately. But we hope to have a website soon.
So I don't know if I have time, but I don't have a question, but maybe a comment on the second videos we watched. That was very dense, incredibly interesting. However, I don't know. It seems to me that there's a very strong focus on the artist, mentioning the institution and the relationship between the artist and the institution, and the market. But something that for me is missing, and that has been a question here yet, is also like the place of like the curators. By running a project space of something self-funded, which was also funded by the Arts Council, we could often pay the artist, but we never could pay us.
But just to make a little note, they. No, wage. You meant wage. They did mention at some point, maybe it wasn't loud enough, that they consider an artist any person that provides content, whether that is programming or... So, in fact, it's a way of addressing also other precarious workers, I think, particularly, for example, curators that are freelancers or, programmers or critics or
whose essential immaterial work is exploited. Unfortunately, she's not here. Maybe also Victoria because Victoria actually worked also, right, with them. Yeah, exactly.
That's entirely correct, the comment that ILiana made, that when Lise uses the word artist, confusingly, it means literally any cultural producer in the contemporary art field. So yeah, I guess that there's a certain, of course, she's an artist. She's the founder of W.A.G.E, so I think there's a bit of a bias there. That's one of the reasons why it's not curator who is equivalent to every single producer in the art field, but the artist. But that also, I think, speaks to a certain view of the art field, right? That sort of, it's the artistic production that's kind of the primary model of production, whereas I think there are other views of the art field where it's actually the curatorial, the kind of network
the one that is
part.
exploited most. Anything that is produced, so the producer, whatever that is the one that, or self-exploits, as you said, because this is a typical example of us. I mean, we face the same. We did this. How long were we working on it? 8 months, a year now, and we are the only ones that are completely unpaid.
The two of us. So in this program.
Maybe what I saw was missing in this presentation is maybe because it's something I know, but being a young gallerist is incredibly difficult, and you're already on the side of the market, and you're more of a curator than a gallerist or dealing with a lot of money and competing. I mean, the market is presented as one big thing, and then she's not making it as an evil thing. But I think maybe there is a lack of complexity in the description of this market and the multi-layered and hierarchical state of this market.
I think it is for a lack of time also, because she wasn't here. It needed to be a bit contained, and this was the maximum length that we allowed. But also I think she's talking about a very North American context as well. Yeah. I mean, the reason why we brought WAGE is because it is an inspirational organization that I don't think exhausts all of, that I don't think exhausts, all of arts roles, works. I think also in this case, it's looking a lot at freelance content producers, not necessarily workers, in, let's say, small institutions. So I don't think it wants to be exhaustive. And WAGE, I think, really started as an artist network, for sure. And that's also why with Future Climates, we want to talk more about art workers, because we want to be, frankly, more inclusive in terms of which positions within the, let's say, institution of art we talk about, which includes curators, includes artists, and other programmers or workers within the institution of art.
And one other thing, I don't know if you noticed, that she was referring also to the non-profit institution, because in the United States, the legislation is as such that MoMA is a non-profit institution, but I mean, you cannot, of course, compare MoMA to Future Climates, for example. So it's also kind of a different art ecology, which is something that we are discussing as well in terms of how would the WAGE ideology be applied in the European context, because it would be interesting and it would be slightly different, I think, in many aspects. So,
can I say something?
Yeah.
My name is Ronnie. I'm co-founder of Jubilee, and of course we appreciate very much the proposals of WAGE. We, in the beginning of this year, initiated a research also on artist contracts. It's called Caveat, from the legal expression caveat emptor, buyer beware. Actually, we try to engage in unfair practices. But in our research, we define the problem of remuneration and contracting, the legal paradigm in which we work. We have defined this as a wicked problem. A wicked problem is the opposite of a tame problem. A tame problem, an example is 1 + 1 = 2. There's a question, there's a clear answer. For a wicked problem, there is no solution. There is only a way of dealing with the problem, which means that in the first stage of our research, we will invite as many parties that are confronted with the problem as possible, including art institutions, gallerists, art workers, producers, artists, because actually the wicked problem has this nasty characteristic that defining the problem already defines the solution, because your perspective on the problem will be your solution, but again, it will be somebody else's problem. So that's why we try to work around this with this research to figure out maybe it's just a question of thinking about other ways of redistributing the huge amount of monies that are circulating within our context, but the methodology of a trickle-down effect, which classical economy is still promoting, I didn't see that much of it trickling down to me, to be honest. So I think debating this with all the people concerned needs to go into redefining what is a sound landscape for art production or art to court, like a redefinition. And as a starting point for the discussion towards developing a specific toolbox for that, we kind of thought of, instead of seeing the contract as something that individualizes benefits and individualizes risk, we would like to start from mutualizing the benefit and sharing the risk, so that a contract becomes maybe a tool of emancipation, and that could be constructive in creating a new class consciousness in the art world, basically. So that would be, for us, I'm not sure. We will look more into detail what exactly the wage proposal will be, of course. But the context in America is definitely quite different from our context in Europe. But including art institutions and not confronting them necessarily, I think that is, for us, it seems like a more constructive way to deal with a problem.
Well, the main difference, I think, is that in the United States, most of these institutions are completely privately funded. I mean, MoMA, Guggenheim, Whitney are 99.5% privately funded, whereas in Europe, most of the institutions are state funded. And this is, I think, is the basis, which is, I mean, it's two different worlds in that sense.
Just to comment on the wage part, I mean, I think what's interesting about the wage project is not necessarily that we need to sort of, within the European context or with any, let's say, local jurisdictional context, that we need to take that and see would it work here. But I think what we need to realize is that the sphere of contemporary art, it's a global transnational sphere. And so when you have a really kind of weighty actor doing something like that in New York context, it's a very useful leverage at a local level. So for example, in France, there is a resale right. There's actually everywhere in Europe, there's a resale right, right? So, but it's not enforced. And so maybe this can become, like wage can become quite a good leverage in also kind of starting up initiatives to enforce the resale royalty within local jurisdictions. So I think it's in this way that thinking about wage is quite useful, as like what kind of standard setting does it bring to the contemporary art world that at a local level we can make use of.
Maybe just a comment also, because I don't know if you're aware that in France there is the La Maison des Artistes, which provides like social security to artists. So there's like a legal kind of framework that also allows to maybe do invoices and things. And yet, of course, the question of fees in France is so super like non-existing as a like systematic practice in institutions. I don't know, anyone correct me if I'm wrong, but so I just wanted to bring in that information. And then I was wondering if anyone here would like to share maybe more in terms of Giulia's intervention, which is also more, I think, from a similar scale in a kind of innovative, like looking for, technical, philosophical also tools or new ways of doing things. I wonder if anyone here has a experience or idea they want to share in terms of that, maybe, or an attempt to change the economy in their own structure, like a more experimental mode. Or okay, so maybe I can ask a direct question then. I think there are some people from W.A.G.E here. And actually, I was a bit curious because I remember going to a kind of, you organize like a dinner for members and you have like a membership system. And I think it's quite elaborate. And you also have, maybe you could describe a bit for those who don't know the structure, how it works as a starting point. Maybe start by introducing maybe the way you work, and if you have like a specific example, but just already introducing.
Hello, my name is Rafaela, so I'm working at W.A.G.E with
Justin.
And yes, so the question was, W.A.G.E first is a squat in North Paris in the 19th. So it's been 2 years. We are occupying the building, which is a next high school, technical high school, but which was like abandoned like for 10 years before we opened the building. And we are about 90 people working there. So it's a mix of visual artists, but also musicians and people from cinema or theater, or craftsmen, or people just from the alternative field. And so yes, last year we started this kind of membership thing that is called Amis de W.A.G.E, which takes the models of institutions. In France, you can have Amis de Palais de Tokyo and so on. And yeah, but I mean, it worked not that well. It was so it's it's a bit organized. So we are giving a dinner like each year since last year. So we have to organize a new one. But so yeah, it was a way to try to bring like fundings, like because we don't have any fundings from the public or from the state. All the fundings we have is like. It's coming from ourselves, so like people who have a working space at W.A.G.E are like paying a little. It's not a rent because rent is a commercial term, but I don't know in English, cotisation. Well, anyway, which is really low. It's like €5 by square meters, so it's like the cheapest thing you can find in Paris, I think. And that because the building is quite big, like it's like 3,000 square meters, so it makes a basis of money that makes the building and stuff like working. And then we host quite a lot of events that are part of our programmation. So we have some bars and we make money from bars, and then also we rent some space for film shootings or music videos or things like that. And so, yeah, it was trying to find a way to get a bit more money to make project, because all the money we raise is reused, like to produce some, I don't know, festival exhibitions, anything like some of the residents want to do. And yeah, so I mean, it brings a bit of money, but not that much. So we have good relationship with la mairie, the arrondissement, and also with the city council. But like the building belongs to la région. And the fact that we don't have any conventionnement or bail or anything, like we don't have any kind of contract like that allows us to occupy the building. So like basically it's illegal occupation. So because of that, we are not able to ask for public fundings. But then it's also a choice in that way, that because we thought about it, and it's a way for us like to keep also our independency, like. And so,
nonetheless, I think the CCN would be a great idea for you guys. You would get a VAT from someone else and be able to even apply for funding if you wanted, without being dependent to any state, French or whichever.
That's really one of the purposes for them, is to allow also collectives or entities that are not legally registered and do not have a VAT number to actually have one through the network.
I just wanted to know if you're insured, and if people visiting your space, basically what happens if there's a fire in the building or if people die? Are you juridically... No, but that's a big question, actually. Are you responsible for it, or what's the deal?
I'm actually responsible for it because I'm the president of the association, I think, but I'm not sure I would...
No, we don't have... I mean, we have insurance, but we don't have a building insurance because we don't own the building, so we cannot have it. We can make a fake one, but we ask everybody to bring our own insurance, like assurance risque.
Because you have openings, you have events.
True. We had some visit by the police department about the security and stuff like that, and we allowed to bring people. I don't know how or why, but we allowed to, in a certain way, the certain level of people, number of people that are allowed to come here, because there's security exit or because of whatever. I mean,
I think that they are used like to manage like squats. So like, yeah, you have a security commission and you all like, as Justin was saying, like to host public.
I don't understand if you win money from public council or not, from City of Paris.
no, but I will. I'm not totally agree with Rafaela. I think we had some support in a way by the state, because we had some supported employment. I don't know how to say it in English, but helped contract in a way, contrat aidé. That is disappearing now, but we had it for a year, so it's quite a good support. And also the region, which is the owner of the place, is not paying us any euro. So in a way, it's also, even if they sue us and trial, and we had a trial, we lost and anything, it's a big support in a way, like I think. But we don't have any money, no.
Est-ce que vous êtes constitué en association loi 1901? Oui. Et comment vous percevez l'argent qui vous rentre en tant que vous recevez pas de l'argent des particuliers, alors vous recevez?
Basically, I was the treasurerman who made all the economic system at DOC. So basically, we it's only like us putting money in a box. It's just this. This is DOC. So when you're a number of people, each month you can get a lot of money in a way. We have a bank account, and the president of the association is the representative legal of this bank account. She has a credit card at her name. So.
Est-ce que vous payez de salaire?
Oh yeah, there's 3 people employed now, but all the idea of DOC is paying and not get paid in a way, not get paid by what. It's only like a free work you do for it. But as it's a lot of work to make free work, we started employed people, and now we just are signing CDI. We said like a fixed employment people, unlimited contract. We are just signing in one now, for instance.
I personally would be curious to know if there are, because there's a lot of different organizations, if there are project spaces here that manage to pay themselves a salary. Anyone? Nice job. I mean, well, we're all in the same boat. And would I'm curious because this is something we encountered, for instance, a lot in Athens, which means that if you're actually even the founder of a not-for-profit, like in her case, maybe also what you said, you can't pay yourself. It's even just really, there's not a legal structure that allows yourself even to, pay yourself a salary.
How do people live without a salary? No, but like we all look relatively well fed here,
Well, a lot of other jobs, I guess, right? I mean.
So basically, that you use employment in other places to compensate for labor of love. Absolutely. Okay. Is that? But I mean, for example, I had a conversation with someone in Vienna the other week who teaches the Angewandte Kunst, which is one of the main art universities there. And he actually thinks, and he does a lot of work on value and valuation in the art field, and he actually thinks it's not the worst model, where the artist or whatever, let's say the art worker, earns their money in a different field to the art field. And I just wonder whether you share that sentiment. But for me, he lives in Vienna. And Vienna is also a very particular kind of social kind of context with certain support structures, et cetera, et cetera. It's inconceivable, someone like that in London or in New York or in a lot of developing countries, for example. I'm just wondering whether people think this is a good model that you're a part of.
I can talk a little bit about London and having a project space without being really paid. The financial structure of the organization I used to run was half private, half publicly funded. So the Arts Council would give us 50% of our budget, and the other 50% had to be made by sales, teaching, and a few other things. I think in a way it can be interesting for a short amount of time, but at a certain point you can't sustain it. I think it goes with a certain age, some expectations with life, or a very big organization like self-organization, not institution. I found it really personally difficult. But London is one of the most expensive city in the world, and a lot of people have left this city over the last 5 to 10 years. Maybe it's very different in Porto or even Berlin, but it seems to me that, like, I don't know how you can sustain this forever. Also because you've got more and more followers and public coming and expectations, and as a curator or as a young gallerist or whatever, you grow up with your peer group, and people get more established, have more expectations, some desire about like production, and it's really, really difficult to be able to bring this money, do a really good job, communicate about it, and deal with 1, 2, 3 other jobs. Because that's what I had to do when I was in London. I was teaching, working for a public institution part-time, and an auction house. And it's really, really difficult to keep doing this for years. And not that long ago, there was a talk at Beaux-Arts in Paris about like project spaces. And that's the point that everybody was sharing, is how can we continue to do this job after 5, 6, 7 years and keep the same energy and focus and dedication. Because at some point, you might want to have a house, have kids, and all those things cost money and time.
Hi, I'm Caroline Ferreira. I'm part of Caro Sposo. So to answer your question, we're 4. 3 people working full-time in art, actually. So very, very busy. And the 4th one is our angel, basically, Stephanie. She doesn't need to work. I mean, she is super interesting. She's been a curator for all her life, but she has not a job, you know. And we started Caro Sposo in 2014. We don't have a place, so it's kind of easy. And you think at the beginning, well, it's going to be easy. We found this place called Cinémathèque Robert Linen in Paris. That's where we do the screening each Tuesday, once a month, usually the 2nd Tuesday. And you think at the beginning it's okay, it's just a newsletter, you just download a video file, and it's true at Cinémathèque as well. We can have the technicians to help us, and they have projectors and everything. But I'm thinking, as you, Guillaume, I'm thinking like we did it and it was great and it was a great adventure. I think we would, without Stephanie, we would have done it maybe 8 months, 1 year, and we would have dropped it. Because, so Marie Canet, who is the teacher at the Art Deco and also at the Beaux-Arts in Lyon, she's also a curator, she writes book. Clément Dirier, he works for J.R. Péringier. He had also Rue Saint-Bon in Paris. I work at Pompidou. So, like, it wouldn't have been possible without Stephanie. So we go on and we are super happy to do it. But I think, three people working in the art world, that would have been possible to keep on. Just also, for example, it's been 2 years we've been invited at Paris International. So of course we don't pay anything, but we have like a booth. And again, who was at the booth every day? Not me, during FIAC.
And you don't sell also.
Oh,
so
no,
essentially you're just contributing value to a for-profit machine without getting anything.
Exactly. And you have, for a fair, and everyone knows that, you have to be on the booth, because even if we don't sell anything, it's nice to be on the booth and to present the artist. So Stéphanie is doing it once again.
Yeah, I actually had a question about that. It's fun you bring it up because I think also other spaces here have participated in Paris International. And I'm just very curious why actually an art space, not necessarily selling, would participate in an art fair. It's a very naive question, but maybe just to open it.
Well, it's like FIAC, they have, actually it's Marie who's doing it, they have this film program. So it's like an addition to a fair. For us, Paris International, we know them. We really like the program. It's not the question of having a booth, actually, and it's not like having a booth. It's just doing the film program for Paris International.
Right. Yeah. Maybe another space? Yeah.
I am Maxime, and here with Julie, we are part of the cheapest university, which is a free school based in Paris. And there is 3 of our friends missing, and they are actually we're all working beside the cheapest university. And we have been part of the Paris International Art Fair in October, but on another position since we were organizer of the talks, and we actually did get paid for the first time through the cheapest university. And it's interesting to know, even if it's kind of controversial, that Paris International is a non-profit organization in terms of like legal aspect, and some of the people are volunteer within the thing, which I did not know before. And since we did hear some criticism about being part of a fair, I was happy to learn that some people are actually working for free. The gallerist I'm talking about, not like the founder of Paris International. And we actually redistribute the money they gave us to the guests we invited, including the collaboration we did with Chanene, with Carosposo, and some others such as Trace. So I don't know if it's pertinent, but that's how we...
But it's interesting, the idea that the fair would kind of subcontract a service or a program to another space, no? Like it's more and more frequent as well, I think.
Symbolic value and visibility. I mean, in the end, that's what... I mean, I remember when Tate, what was it, years ago, when they celebrated their 10 years with independence, which was basically a huge program of independent spaces, all gathering in the Turbine Hall. And I remember being there, talking to the not-for-profit spaces. None of them had been given any budget. So it was basically really contributing content by not for free. I think we become co-founders and co-financers of that because, as you say, we use our own money coming from other sources to make that happen. I mean, it's not free. It's actually a cost, only that it's ourselves taking it. It's free for Tate. They're getting it for free. But what I'm curious also about, and I don't know how much this is happening in Paris, I mean, I'm also the artistic co-director of a space in Berlin that is called Savvy Contemporary, and we're also a project space. And I must say, let's say, paramount for our budgets and for our accountings is collaboration with institutions of different sizes. So with a different infrastructure, with different possibilities, and through that, it's actually really through those collaborations so that we manage to enable our own team to actually be paid. And I wonder how much that actually happens in this context and how much these conversations, let's say, go out of like, let's say, all, same institutions with same problems, which of course, we can have a force in terms of leverage, as maybe the contribution of W.A.G.E was showing. But on the other hand, we do need conversations, discussions, and collaborations with institutions of different sizes that can provide what we're missing. And so I wonder, because also I've just been at the Pompidou and I saw Cosmopolis, so there is a certain interest, it seems, also in small-scale organization. I'm just curious to hear experience of sorts in that. Maybe less exploitative, say, than in the case of art fairs.
It's funny because Cosmopolis, they invited us and they didn't want to give us money to work. But they asked us to be part of the program every Wednesday for 2 months. So it's interesting also a private organization, not a private, like a non-profit organization such as the Paris International Fair give us more freedom and more money than the big institution in the center of Paris. We are not asking for money every day. It's through the cheapest university, but when this situation happened, it's quite funny because at the same time, so they were expecting us to be there every week, and we're like, we cannot do it. It's not possible in terms of time and money, actually.
Kind of like wrong because in our conversations what always happens is that larger institutions don't understand that we're not people on a salary, so that we obviously cannot offer a time that is unpaid, and that any service that we offer actually needs to be paid for, because it's not embedded. And I admit though that often when these conversations happen, things can actually change. I feel sometimes there's a sort of mutual ignorance about each other's condition. I mean, I don't know in this case.
I just wanted to mention an artwork that I've never seen, but that was described to me. It's a neon piece by an artist, obviously, but saying visibility is not a currency. And it's exactly what we are talking with institution and art fairs. Yes, it is not, and yes, it is. We are wondering why do we attend those like art fairs also for projects like those ones? Because we believe in it. We want the artists that we're showing having more visibility. We want this project to get more visibility. We hope maybe in a way that it could develop to something different. And I guess that's maybe the same with like talks and other things. You were mentioning the Tate Modern with this project, No Soul for Sale. That's such an ironical title regarding the fact that they never paid you. And most of the time they don't pay artists to exhibit works, to install it, or sometimes even for performances. So I think what we've seen like tonight and this afternoon, it's also like the problem with the market, but this problem is not only the market, it's also like the big institution who have as much power as this market and sustain this organization.
But I mean, I think though, and we've had this conversation already actually, that by accepting that visibility as a currency, we're also implicated in letting that happen. By accepting those propositions, we're contributing to the reproduction of that structure. And so the question is, as small-scale organizations, or again as volunteers and putting volunteer labor, etc., how does a movement of, say, resistance can actually start by, for instance, a mobilization towards not accepting certain labor conditions, for example. I mean, that's why it was interesting to look at actually artists' unions such as WAGE, because that's something that's actually very much missing in art workers, again, within the sort of voluntary labor market.
But I mean, it's quite important to also understand the reality that we're living. I'm just going to go back to the legislation part of it in the EU, and the fact that we as cultural workers are extremely disposable, and the system of how we have been made disposable the last, I would say, 20 years is very, very well thought out, because education is as well implicated. You have an influx of master courses and degrees that are creating more curators, more artists. Therefore, demand and offer, there's so many people outside the door that can do the job for less than what you would ask. And this is, I think, the biggest question that we should be asking ourselves of what Antonia says. Of course, we need to unionize, but how can you do that? And I'm not saying you can't, I'm just asking, how can you do that when the conditions that neoliberalism has created are by de facto competitive ones? I would say from my experience of being in the art world for about 17 years now, I would say that artists are much more unionized, and there's much more camaraderie, for example, than between curators.
But that's the point. The point is try to respond with collective movements against this competition, which is what I found very interesting in the WAGE proposition, also of course, working with artists at various stages of their career. So with very different, also, let's say, symbolic value and value of leveraging. And so it should be a network between institutions of different sizes. And then you create solidarity structures. I don't want to use maybe the word unionizing necessarily, but definitely solidarity structure where you not just, every time I I stopped accepting, for instance, to write for free, because every time I did it, I felt I was contributing to an economy that was reproducing it. The issue is, if it's just me saying, no, I'm not contributing to your book for free, then of course they're just going to pass to someone else. But if nobody accepts, and that's the issue when then creating a collective movement, then it's a different thing. You have leverage power, and that's, I think, what we generally should aim to.
I just want to echo what Antonia was saying, because I think recognizing, right, that visibility is a currency, it means that it's actually something that's used by the entire ecology, right? And currencies, how do currencies work? With their exchange rates, right? And they move, and we can track those movements. But in order for that to exist, we need standards, right? And in order for standards to exist, we need exactly collective movements, or kind of solidarity platforms that enforce these standards. And I mean, I hear your point, ILiana, about the kind of the legislative basis on, let's say, national scale. But I think there's something about being in contemporary art that allows you to sort of surpass that in a certain way, because you can actually create your own standards in this field. It's very difficult, right? Because you need to get traction, you need to be heard, etc. But there are certain, I think, leverages in terms of using reputational power, in terms of understanding how branding works, because we understand how branding works really well in this field, although we would probably not admit it, right? So I think all of these things are actually speaking about a lot of affordances, like a lot of actually possibilities of this field to form parallel standards to the legal system.
I didn't finish. I didn't finish my thinking. That's where I wanted to actually end. That I think we should be aiming for that root of the problem, which is the legislative. So to propose, kind of through collective discussions, then we can propose actually how can we change the legislation, how can we monitor, for example, the influx and the graduation numbers, just to reflect on our title, of curators and of artists. All these things, how do we, I think if there is a regulation of some of this sort in the market, whatever this market is, it can be education, it can be the private market, it can be the non-profit institutions, I'm not using just the monetary value of notion of the word market, then I think we have more chances. I mean, my speculation.
Yeah, I would like to add something. So I'm a director of a place where everybody are paid. It's called Chiasma. And I can imagine working with people. Thanks, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. But I think perhaps a way to think about the question, which is, of course, a super important issue that you are talking about. Perhaps you are talking about making a kind of collaborative things or union between people. But I think it's not. I think there is a lack in that perception because it's a union in between same kind of people. And I think there is another way of thinking about that question that would be to open reflection with a kind of strategy of a common strategy with people coming from other fields than art fields. Because I don't think there is solution only in the inner field of art.
In English, the word union kind of immediately reflects to a kind of union of workers' union. I mean union as in unionizing, as in grouping, as in commoning, as in being collective. That's what.
Yeah. So I think I will continue in that direction, in the Marxist way of making a union. But in another way, I would say, as you say like that would mean that there is a common horizon, which is not the case at the moment. So the union, I think, is not possible, but this is the project. Because to create the union is necessary to create a common vocabulary, a common project, common things, and it doesn't exist for real. But there is a lot of way to learn about other way of doing things, and I think to create a kind of sustainable activities, we need also in art to be connected to other fields, other practice and social practice, and other see how other people are doing their things, and find a way to have, because people are paid in Chiasma, but money coming from 100 different sides. So it's a mix of a lot of different things. Only the half of the money coming from the field of art for real, and the rest is a kind of extended cultural field, which that means at the end leads something super far from the market, super far in a way. And so that also the question of the imagination of what working means. As you said, we open with art a lot new field of meaning of working. And so it's really hard to one end creating a lot of new conditions and saying we need more regulation or we open, yeah. And so in a certain way, we have also to reflect how to open those new field and new conception of working. Because of course, when you are working in the field of art and when there is a common conversation about working in the society as during election or something, you don't have anything to say it because we're totally out of the question. All your arguments are totally out of the question. And so we have to reflect how to be connected with that world of workings that create new meanings, but in the same moment that we're opening new meanings, we have to open also new conditions. And I think in art we are creating our own conditions, so we have to be able now to yeah. But if you construct your own precarity, you can complain about that.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think we should have a break now, actually, because more people are coming, and we need to kind of shift also. Yeah, another is leaving, so maybe we shift